around the pandemic and the government review, the government trials rather, Transport Minister Rachel Maclean said e-scooters may offer the potential for convenient, clean and cost-effective travel that may also help ease the burden on the transport network, provide another green alternative to get around and allow for social distancing. And the trials will allow us, I mean the government, to test whether they do these things. So this is an opportunity to see how things are going so far. We've got a number of trials going on across the UK, not yet in London, where I'm an MP, but hopefully before too long. And we're hearing from a number of operators. They're not here, reminding them as well as everybody, they're not here to sell themselves, but to address some of the challenges they've faced as operators, but also key stakeholders. So the speakers we've got are, first of all, Richard Dilks, who's the Chief Exec of Como UK, which is a trade organisation, and then I'll take questions to Richard. Pete Mills, who's the Public Affairs Officer for the Guide Dogs for the Blind Association, and we know, and I know the association had a big meeting yesterday with MPs. They have a number of concerns, as we all know, about e-scooter use. And then we're going to hear very briefly from, I think, all of the active trade e-scooter operators in the UK. Colette Dunkley from Neuron, Alan Clark from Lime, Ben Bell from Tier, Hire from Super Pedestrian, Richard and Richard Corbett from VOI, Phil Ellis from Beryl, Richard Mckiernan, sorry, we've also got Richard Mckiernan from Avon and Somerset Police, and Dominique Dunbrook from North Devon Council. So let me start first with Richard Dilks, as I say, the Chief Exec of Comco. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. We've got an excess of Richards on the call today, for which I can only apologise. Delighted to be speaking, delighted the APPG is taking a structured interest in this area. Adam and I have had a number of helpful chats about that. And I say that because for us as a charity dedicated to the public benefit of shared transport, it is very important to learn more about e-scooters in the shared form. That's our part of the world, and that's all that's lawful in the UK at the moment. And then to think how they integrate with other forms of shared transport, but also going beyond that. So their impact on walking and cycling, on public transport use is of high interest to us, as is their impact on private car use. I have some slides. I'm conscious of the time allotted to me, so I'll be moving through at pace. You'll be relieved to hear. So let me share those and get going. And hopefully you can see those. So this is us. We have quite a lot of the characteristics of a trade body in the sense of a collectivizing and representative function with e-scooter operators. We have an associate membership category with them. Really good to see lots of them on this call today. But we're not quite the trade body as such, in the sense that we also have very, very close working relationships with authorities, local, regional transport and national government. And we are a charity that's going after this public benefit bit. Not quite the same as just the growth of shared transport, you'll note. It is about the public benefits, specifically social, economic and environmental benefits. So this is pre-June 2020, our world of focusing on bike share, car share, lift share, and e-scooter share has come into that world. And I think it's been generally a very positive experience, both in the sense of how the trials are going, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail, and I'm sure we'll hear lots about that from other speakers, but also in the galvanizing effect that I've found this has had on transport policy and thinking. That goes along with, of course, COVID has shaken a lot of things up too. Not to say all in the garden is rosy. I think we have a worrying trend of a net shift towards motorised car transport and private car transport going on. But you know, the advent of the trials generally, I think, has been a real positive. A very quick portrait on where we are as a country. We have this new effectively stiffer target of 78% greenhouse gas emission cut by 2035. That's terrific to have the target. The question is how to actually go about it. Transport is the problem child here. We are now the largest emitting single sector, and in fact emissions from it drifted gently upwards, not shelved very steeply downwards as they need to. And we have more private cars than ever in this country, 38.8 million of them, up substantially, as you'll see, from just a few years ago. This is our map that we run on our website. Apologies, it's slightly fuzzy, of trials that are up and running. There are a little bit more to add here, particularly London, as Ruth rightly mentioned. We are hopefully soon to be there with a scheme up and running in London. And I think, again, that I anticipate that having a positive galvanizing effect on surface transport policy, data gathering, coherence in London, which is something that needs to improve. So where are we? So to note that this is not official data. The DfT is gathering official data through a quite comprehensive looking monitoring evaluation system. That does have its first report coming soon, very end of this month or start of the next, into DfT, but not necessarily out in implications of any findings. And then there are fuller reports rolling through the year again into DfT. So I'm taking these numbers from what has been pulled together with the operators. They're not complete. So coming up to 10,000 scooters the next few weeks, probably. That's been climbing steadily since the first one. At least 2 million journeys, and average trip length being over 4 miles in the big trials anyway, is an interesting one, because 4 miles is therefore beyond traditional average walking trip lengths. So one of the concerns, understandably, has been, are we hollowing out walking as a mode here? On that indication, it would seem to be the answer is no, we're not. This, apologies how the formatting has gone wrong, many apologies. This is to give a sense that almost all the trials, and certainly all the operators involved in trials, have put forward a number of initiatives around COVID, centering on key workers and essential journeys. That's common more broadly across shared transport, across shared bikes and shared cars also. And there's a particular relevance here because the legality of shared e-scooter trials hangs around emergency powers that the government took under COVID. That is the legal justification for exploring this mode via these trials. These slides are from other published sources. In this case, this is the work that the City of Portland in the United States has done to analyze the impact of e-scooters there. And then I have a few follow-up slides from Augustin Friedl, who's an analyst, some of the operators will know, on European and US comparators. I won't go into any of these numbers, just leave you to read them if they're of interest. You can certainly see some positive impacts going on here. You can also see some abstraction, and for us, it is important to understand what the net impact is. There is bound to be some abstraction from, for example, walking or from cycling. The question is, what is the net overall impact? To take a parallel with shared cars, we of course find that people who come from not owning or using a car at all to car sharing increase their driven mileage, because their previous driven mileage was 0 miles. But there's a bigger proportion of people who come from owned car to shared car who will cut their mileage substantially, which is an interesting consistent finding over the years. And overall, it is a net cut. So that's the important point, I think. You will see here, just I will rattle through these rather, but you'll see here how context dependent these findings are, which I'm sure we're going to find in the UK trials to some degree too. So clearly how much you take out of car journeys heavily depends on how many car journeys you had in the first place, how dominant the car was as a mode in an area. And that's this slide is specifically on that, and you can see a general trend from left to right of places on the left that have less car dominance and typically more public transport provision, over to the right, where these are US cities, with the exception of Brussels, which has actually a surprisingly sparse public transport system and has terrible traffic problems and car dominance. And the same point for public transport, you can see here very clearly. It depends very much what the existing context on public transport was. So to wrap up, important here how these things are integrated. That's across all levels, data, transport planning, and so on. But I wanted to dwell on just the physical hub aspect here. A couple of examples here of these hublets that are starting to pop up, provide facilities of various kinds in areas. Here's a schematic of a bigger scale one. This is something we now work on in depth. And I think these are where the trend is going, and I think they can be very positive for e-scooter share, but for sustainable transport more broadly. And they can knit together the different options. And I think here we're bringing supply and demand together. We're making things attractive and easy for people to do the right things. And by flip side, hopefully we're making it harder, more expensive, less social to do the wrong things. These apply, I think, in a whole range of areas, not just urban contexts. And we are running an accreditation system on these, which then matches in with our accreditation on Bike Share and Car Club. And we are going to look in this coming work here about whether there's a role for accrediting e-scooter share systems as well. And on hubs, this accreditation gives us gold, silver, bronze badges for the different levels of provision. That's me. I think I've stuck to time. Very good to be with you. I will stop my screen sharing and very much look forward to the debate. Ruth, I think you're on mute.
I know. Yes, there's a split second when I realise, and there's 2 seconds till I work out how I get my mouse to my mic icon. So I've got a couple of questions. How can e-scooter riders be fully educated on the safety risks? And interestingly, especially around HGVs, the construction and minerals industry has worked hard over the years to work on cycle safety, but e-scooters seem even more vulnerable. So need the same, if not more, awareness. In fact, there's two elements to that: is the awareness of the HGV drivers and the awareness of e-scooter riders. I mean, that's something for the e-scooter providers to think about when they've got their 3 minutes. But does Comco have a general, do you have anything to say, particularly around additional training for HGV drivers?
Yes, thank you. So we're in a world where DFT has not prescribed anything here, so there is no sort of formal national training program. That is something we're exploring actually with a number of stakeholders. Is there something we could be working on through this phase that might then become a national standard? So it's very much a strand of activity we've got going. There is clearly a need here to educate riders. The operators will, I'm sure, want to pick up on this. They all have ways of doing that and communicating with them. I think broadly, there's a particular thing about early rides. That's where the preponderance of incidents happen. So that's clearly a logical area to focus on. HGV specifically, it's a really good question. It's something TfL have done an awful lot on with cycling, actually. And as you rightly say, it's a two-way thing. So that's about the HGV drivers and their awareness, and it's about the cyclists. And essentially, in various ways, you want to get people to swap roles. So you want the scooter riders to understand what it's like driving the HGV, what they can and can't see, what the dynamics of the vehicle movement are, and vice versa. And I think there's actually quite a lot of exciting stuff can be done there. I can see Steve Wilson contributing in the chat, who's certainly got quite a lot of insight on this. These are just the sorts of things that these trials should be learning about, and I hope to see that learning is happening and happening in public domain, so that if we cast forward to legalisation, we're armed with some UK specific points that can help form what goes into that legislation that the main time legalise e-scooters.
Right, thank you. If speakers in general can log these questions, because they may be, they could be answered by other speakers as well. Chris Boardman, hi Chris, has asked about the shift in mode away from active modes, i.e. walking and pedal cycling. That seems significant. Do we have a picture about that in the UK? Because I think all of that bar chart, which I saw quickly, was non-UK. And linked to that, Casper Hughes's question about modal share around Scoot plus public transport. What are we seeing in terms of, and also from other countries, what do we know about the portability, well, to which the fact that the portability of e-scooters more than bikes, are people using them as part of split journeys with public transport?
Thank you. So the portability bit, of course, this is heavily contextualized by the fact that private e-scooters are lawful to buy, lawful to use on private land, but as we probably all on this call know, not lawful to use on public land. What we have that is lawful is a shared scheme where generally you're not meant to be taking it on the rail station or the bus, you're meant to drop it off at the rail station or the bus station, because then someone else can use it. So I think we've sort of a bit of a curious picture on that right now. In principle, the point is right. I think there's an interesting thing here long term for going to have e-scooters legal for what the provision on trains is for such things. See also folding bicycles and non-folding bicycles. Basically, the more we can help knit these things helpfully together, that help people avoid private car, particularly solo occupancy private car, the better off we're going to be in terms of getting to 2050, etc. On Chrissy's question about the impact on active, we don't have official UK numbers here yet. From what I've seen of the trials, actually this impact has been less in the UK than a lot of those other comparator countries, but we don't have our place on the graph. Operators, I think, will probably want to address this in what they talk about. For us, it's a key thing to have an eye on. As I say, it's the net impact that in particular attracts my interest. Right,
thank you, Richard. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in, but we're not going to be able to get to them now because I do need to move on. I'm a bit over time because we've got Pete Mills, who's the Public Affairs Officer for the Guide Dogs for the Blind Association. And thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation and for answering those questions. So over to you, Pete.
Right, thanks for the invitation to speak. Guide Dogs, alongside our services, we campaign to make it easier for people with sight loss to get out and about, whether that's making streets safer to navigate, making public transport more accessible, or making sure businesses welcome assistant dog owners. So that's why e-scooters are very much on our radar. And the government may have yet to make its decision on legalising e-scooters, but they're already on our streets in numbers. Alongside the official trials, sales of e-scooters are booming. Retailers are reporting incredible percentage increases in sales, even though, as Richard mentioned, their products are illegal to use on public roads. There's this legal loophole that allows their sales, provided they're for use on private land only, and you only have to visit your local high street to see that this is being widely ignored. We ran a poll with YouGov earlier this month, which found that even with the lockdown, half the people who'd come across e-scooters in the past 6 months said they'd seen users driving unsafely, which is very concerning. E-scooters on the roads or in cycle lanes are one thing, but when they're driven on the pavement or when rental e-scooters are inconsiderately parked, they can have a real impact on pedestrians, particularly those with disabilities. And e-scooters operate almost silently, so people with vision impairment have little or no warning when they're approaching, particularly if they're on the pavement. As Ruth mentioned, we earlier this week had an event where we heard from Rachel from Nottingham, who uses a long cane to get around. And there's an e-scooter trial operating in her area. And since that started, she told us that she'd had problems with parked e-scooters pretty much every time she goes out. She'd even been injured trying to get round one. And she also talked about e-scooters driving past her at high speed on the pavement. And what those incidents mean for her is that she's now more anxious, she's less confident to get out. She even has to take a detour to avoid e-scooters when she's going out. And her experience is pretty typical of what we've been hearing from our service users, both in and out of trial areas. And we've been engaging with operators, many of whom are here today, to try and make these trials as safe as possible for people with sight loss. I mean, we welcome the evidence-based approach that the government's taking to these vehicles. We do think there's more that operators can do. I mean, at the start of the trials, we heard some pretty strong claims from operators about how various safety measures, things like geofencing or GPS for parking, would stop e-scooters being used unsafely. And I don't think we're there yet, but I think we do have a common interest with operators in making those claims reality. But our biggest concern is really about the growth in the numbers of privately owned e-scooters, which are at the moment completely unregulated. I mean, operators do have tools at their disposal to influence the behavior of their e-scooter users, whether that's tech or training or whatever. But that doesn't happen when you go to a shop and you walk out with an e-scooter, or you just order one on Amazon. We've been involved in the government's evaluation of the e-scooter trials, but they simply aren't looking at privately owned e-scooters, which we think is a huge gap in the evidence that's being gathered. I mean, they're out there. We need to know what their impact is. We'll be making some recommendations to government at the end of the trials, but we've identified 3 areas where we think more needs to be done to make pedestrians safer right now. So it's about the safety of e-scooters themselves, about enforcement, and about regulating those private e-scooter sales. As I mentioned, one of the key challenges for people with sight loss is they can't hear an e-scooter coming. And this was a problem for electric cars as well. But following a campaign which we led, new vehicles now have to produce this constant warning sound to let pedestrians know that they're approaching. And we think there could be a similar role for something like that to make e-scooters safer. I know that some operators are already planning to test audible warnings in the field, and that's something we really welcome. I mean, clearly they're not going to be a silver bullet if there are still lots of e-scooters driving on the pavement. But an audible warning would give someone with sight loss a fighting chance to know that there's something coming. On enforcement, we know that e-scooters are never going to be the top priority for police services, but without some level of enforcement, unsafe behaviour is becoming the norm, and that's where we're concerned we're headed at the moment. Whenever we've raised the issue of enforcement with the government, they've simply said it's an operational matter for the police. This is nothing to do with us. We don't think that's good enough. You can't plan to introduce a new type of vehicle to the streets without thinking about how enforcement is going to work and what support the police need. And finally, on regulating sales, some retailers don't even pretend to tell their customers that it's illegal to use an e-scooter on public roads. Why would they? They want to make the sale. And because of this loophole, dangerous high-speed e-scooters are widely available to buy. The maximum speed of a rental e-scooter is 15.5 miles an hour. But if you log on to Amazon, it will take 30 seconds to find a vehicle that goes 2 or 3 times that. I saw one with a top speed of 30 miles an hour, which was advertised as great for the commute. And another one I found was 52 miles an hour. And these vehicles are simply dangerous. They shouldn't be available at all, even if e-scooters are legalized. So if the government legalizes e-scooters, the people who already own or use them aren't going to suddenly change their behavior. It's much easier to get the rules right now before any decision to introduce e-scooters is made, rather than trying to fix things afterwards. And that's why we've been working to try and make sure that people with disabilities don't lose out as a result. Sorry, I think that's 7 minutes.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Pete. That's fantastic. Thank you. Do you have any links with similar organisations in other countries where e-scooters have generally been legalised and where there are also rollout of hire schemes? Do people with sight impairment in other countries experience the same issues that people are experiencing here?
Yes, so we've spoken to some organisations in other European countries where there've been similar issues. I think of kind of Austria or Poland. We don't think these are issues that have been solved when things have been introduced elsewhere. In other countries, there is a different balance between the mix of shared e-scooters and private e-scooters. Obviously, here at the moment, the number of private e-scooters dramatically outweighs the trials that are going on. But the basic issues about parking and about driving on the pavement are things that we see. We've heard other organisations in other countries talk about just as much as here.
Thank you. The other issue I think you mentioned, no, you did mention that I know is an issue is in the rental trials, the difference with where there are docking stations or docking areas and those where you don't have to dock in a particular place. Have you got enough data to get a sense if there's a different experience in those different cities?
Yes, I mean, we would strongly prefer docking areas. I mean, it comes down to like the way that parking is enforced. It's much easier to enforce when you've got set areas. But we do know that even in schemes where there are set areas, the technology isn't necessarily precise enough to ensure that the vehicles are kept in that area. So I mean, we get sent a lot of images of rental e-scooters. They're parked on tactile paving in front of a crossing, or they're in front of a drop curb, and that's always going to be a problem for any pedestrian. But for someone with sight loss or someone with mobility impairment, that's going to be a real problem. Okay,
thank you very much, Peter. I'm just, my skim reading of the questions coming in, I don't see any that would be specifically for Pete. I just want to speak up in front of, well, I've had somebody on a local next door group today, and I have a friend, both of which have, for whom they're desperate for the legalization of e-scooters because of their disabilities, hidden disabilities. E-scooters really work for them. Of course, they would be responsible users. So this is, this is a difficult space to be in. But I'm well aware of the issues that you raised, Pete. And in my borough yesterday, I think a mother and a small toddler were crashed into by someone on a e-scooter in a pedestrianised area. Okay, thank you, Pete, for that. Really, it's really good to hear from you and from the Guide Dogs for the Blind. I'm now going to move on to the operators, and as you were briefed, this isn't an opportunity for a sales pitch, but for you to address any of the challenges or useful lessons learnt that from the trials so far that need to be applied or could be applied. I'm not sure if we've got anybody from the Department for Transport here today, but we will be, as I'm sure you are, relaying collective information to the DFT. So I'll start with Colette Dunkley from Neuron Mobility. Over to you, Colette.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Colette from Neuron. We're the lead operator in Australia and New Zealand, and we also run operations in the Far East since 2016. In the UK, we operate 3 towns, which is Slough, Newcastle and Sunderland. So I'll briefly just give you a bit of a vignette of our experience so far since October on each of these 3 cities. So our foray really was the Slough launch in October with 250 e-scooters. Our rider survey, which we do every 3 months there, shows that 38.4% of riders would have used a car if the scooter was not available. The other two cities, we're not quite up to the 3 months yet, but we'll have it next month. Slough's basically got the largest trading estate in Europe. So it's more of a business usage, this. And so we find that typical journeys include people commuting from the rail or the bus stations to the trading estate and also to Slough's large hospital. Just answering that question from earlier, in other cities, we find that between 45 and 60% of scooter journeys are part of an integrated journey with another form of transport. Typical journeys in Slough are between 1.5 and 3 kilometres, and we've issued over 1,000 free passes to the NHS staff. We've also actually been running a pilot test for home visiting care workers. We think this is a good application for scooters. They do up to 8 home visits a day in the same neighbourhood, don't always have a car, so find this form of transport very cheap and convenient. In February this year, we launched in Newcastle, which is a city with very different needs and characteristics to Slough. And at that time, we were in full lockdown. So although Newcastle's 58,000 students were not all there, quite a lot were, and they were somewhat bored. They couldn't go to pubs, restaurants, or dating, and so they decided they wanted to try out the e-scooters. So the very first week of the trial was marked with high usage, mostly in the student areas. We had a little bit of antisocial behaviour occurred, and having built a pretty good relationship with the council and Northumberland police, we immediately agreed to implement a ride curfew from 11 o'clock at night to 5 a.m. every morning. We also added a rider reaction test to the app from 9 p.m. So what that does is allow riders to test how fast their reactions are before they start the ride. We, like most of the other operators, I'm sure, take a zero tolerance approach to this. And so we started issuing a few bans and suspensions and letters for more minor offences. We also agreed with the council to increase the number of designated parking spaces, because the more you have, this tends to encourage good parking behaviour because they're nearby. We actually have a talking...
Colette, that's your 3 minutes up, unfortunately.
All right. Okay. Sorry. We should have warned you. We're going to be quite strict. So I now move on to Alan Clark, who's from Lyme.
Hi everyone, thanks Ruth. First of all, I wanted to apologise. I've already done this to the other panellists, but also to all the attendees. I'm actually didn't quite make it to where I was intending to do the call from today. So I'm inside of a car. So in particular for this APG, I realise that's tonally very poor, but I apologise nevertheless. So very quickly, a couple of lessons from Lyme. We're the world's largest e-scooter company. We operate on about 5 continents. So some things that we sort of have learned both from the UK and elsewhere. I think specifically, first of all, thinking about the UK and also responding to a few of the comments in the Q&A, I think it's also very important for us to remember that in the UK at the moment, the trials are not only a trial of scooter operators, but they're also a trial of regulation. And that varies quite significantly from city to city. And I think some of the types of issues that Pete raised before are obviously incredibly important for the long-term success and long-term public support of scooters. But there's also a question in there about regulation and about ensuring that, you know, as we touched on before, the issue with private scooters at the moment, clearly no regulation is a bad situation for everybody. I think light touch regulation, even of scooter operators, probably doesn't result in the types of outcomes that we would expect in UK cities. So actually, I think what we've seen thus far is the most successful areas where we've been involved with have been actually where the regulation and the scheme has been quite tight. So things like, for example, requiring parking areas, requiring scooters to only be left in certain areas. And certainly the places where we've worked with councils to do that, I think from our perspective, has certainly seen a greater deal of public support than the places where perhaps we've launched before with services that didn't have that level of regulation and level of agreement and level of management. So I think in going forward, that's going to be very, very important. And I think certainly in future, whenever a trial in London comes to fruition, looking at how that's done through TfL's management potentially of that and through the work that potentially has gone into that should maybe provide a model in future for how we can look at that. And it'd be interesting to see whether or not that's successful in the context of a city of the size and complexity of London. I think just to touch on a couple of other points very quickly, one of the things that we're very keen on, we've learned elsewhere, is about multimodality. For us, that means typically offering bikes and scooters, and there are lots of cities around the world where we offer both, typically pricing the bikes below the scooters. And I know there was a lot of questions in the Q&A about the relationship between the two, and I certainly think that's one way in which certainly where there are concerns that people have that scooter use might eat other forms of more preferable transport like cycling and walking, actually having those available on one app, and perhaps even regulating that the price when they're put side by side always incentivizes someone to take a bike or obviously walk for free rather than take an e-scooter, is one way that we can guard against that kind of cannibalization of people cycling and walking moving on to e-scooters. And that's something that we certainly do all across the world where we have those two modes, including places like Milton Keynes. We always price the bikes below that of the scooters. And I think that's really important because it also opens a whole new avenue to people potentially using a bike for the first time who might download our app to use a scooter and then use a bike in future. So I think there's also something to be balanced off there that we've seen
Time's
before.
up. Sorry, Alan.
No problems, Adam.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you, Alan. Now, Ben Bell, who's from TIA. And if you could particularly focus on the opportunity for your camera positioning system, which is so much more useful, I believe, than GPS for things like docking stations and keeping off footways.
Sure. I can come to that. Well, thank you for the invitation today. It's great to line up alongside friends and other operators and share our lessons. So for background, Climate Neutral TIA, Europe's largest operator, serving 100 cities and led by a CEO founder who's donated his entire stake in the business to sustainable causes. So we've been live in the UK since October, and as to relevant lessons we've experienced here and abroad. So before getting to the actual running of a scheme, a lesson according to some cities is that from a procurement perspective, they'd love to have first tested the vehicles, although COVID admittedly made that difficult this time around. It's not often that vehicles are put through their paces to test operator claims around, for example, parking technology, where we could have sort of shown off that camera positioning technology that means that we are able to minimize that margin of error that comes with typical GPS from the two plus meters that can occur down to under 20 centimeters. And I'd be happy to share more details on that with the listenership afterwards. There's a growing consensus among local authorities that in the event of long-term legalization, that extra due diligence around testing claims and vehicles would be to the benefit of public safety and tidy streets. And then the operational starting point needs to be respect for cities and listening to their diverse needs. That means never launching without permission or having a growth at all costs mindset. Unless you're operating on that basis, that trust will quickly erode and the scheme will never win the public buy-in necessary for success. And then one of the biggest lessons that city authorities anywhere have learned over the years relates to parking. So Paris is probably the best example of this. Initially e-scooters were not regulated and early operators flooded the city with thousands of vehicles. This led to chaos and public safety risk with scooters dumped on the streets. TIA was one of the last to launch in Paris, but when we did, we were the first to restrict customers to park only in designated bays. So this responsible approach was one of the reasons we were then kept on when the city really got a grip on operators. And this mandatory parking model has now become the standard in Paris and many subsequent cities, including most recently in UK e-scooter trials. And then another lesson from abroad worth mentioning is that unlike most UK trials, international schemes are typically multi-operator. And that brings competition and choice, not just in pricing and service quality, but also in applying extra pressure to make sure that people are doing right by vulnerable groups and keeping streets tidy. So we think cities around the country should welcome additional operators in the event of trial extensions. But then all of this is subordinate to the importance of prioritizing rider and community safety in the first place. Operators need to not only ensure mandatory training before people use scooters in the first place and tough enforcement against unsafe riding, as we and many others do, but work hand in hand with the police, with sight loss charities, with other disability groups, with transport safety groups and so forth. For our part, we not only listen.
Ben, sorry, 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so now we've got Haya. We're welcome back to this group. Haya Duidri, who's from Super Pedestrian. Hi, Haya.
Hello, hi everyone, and thanks so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it. So a quick introduction about Super Pedestrian. We spun out of MIT in 2013 a world leader in transportation robotics and human scale mobility. We make the world's smartest, safest shared e-scooter. We started operating shared fleets in Europe in September 2020, and we already serve around 10 cities in Europe. We'll be in another 10 before the end of the summer. And we love talking about safety, so really excited to be here today. 4 things that we've learned from operating across Europe that apply to British cities. First one is geofencing consistency, accuracy, and speed control is key to protecting pedestrians. And really not surprised to hear from Pete Mile. We know what does and doesn't exist when it comes to geofencing technology, what is economically viable to put on every scooter in your fleet and what is not. And so when it comes to geofencing technology, we've actually spent 2 years studying it before even putting one scooter on the ground. And I think that the potential solution to a lot of the issues around pedestrian safeties is to actually embed more data and intelligence into the scooter and into the vehicle itself. Potential inaccuracies with GPS and delays to communication can be solved when you have the technology embedded in your scooter. And if you hold all the geofencing mapping information, this could kind of significantly improve the accuracy and the reliability over time. I think it's really important that cities, when choosing an operator, they actually do testing, which is not only like a 20 minutes test, but actually do testing over a period of time to see how is the reliability of the solution and have assurance that this will be applied to every vehicle. I think that's a really key component of selecting operators. Second thing is parking solutions are all about public-private collaborations. Cities need to be assertive when it comes to parking hubs, but they also need to work with the operators to enable enough parking solutions in order for a designated parking area solution to actually work. So it can only work when the city takes the lead, and when there is that public-private collaboration. The enablement of those parking solutions combined with the technology to enable accurate ending of trips in those parking solutions is how it works, and that is how we can solve the problem of having scooters on pavements, where we need to allocate the space that is not on the pavements in order to get the scooters out of the pavements. Third thing is rider and community education is really key to safe integration. It's also really important to start early. I mean, we've partnered in the UK to teach 9,000 school children and teachers how to use push scooters safely. Starting with grassroots campaigns and doing rider trainings will really help the e-scooter riders of tomorrow. And last thing is agreeing with Ben, right number of operators for the size of the city. It's really important to have multiple operators. We've learned that for smaller cities is 2 operators maybe, and for mid-size, bigger cities, 3 to 4 operators. Exclusivity is really not good.
Thanks, Haya. Sorry, time's up.
Sorry, the 3 minute. Yeah, we're used to 3-minute deadlines as MPs. Richard Corbett now. From VOI, and thank you to Haya.
Thanks, Ruth. I'm going to jump straight into this. Many of you know who Voi is. We're a Swedish operator and the UK's largest operator in over 18 cities across the UK, accounting for 60% of all journeys on shared e-scooters since trials began last summer. UK is a very different market to the rest of Europe from a legislative, city infrastructure and rider behaviour perspective. And therefore, it's important to focus on the key lessons from the UK for the purposes of this call. So we're going to cover understanding who uses scooters, managing parking clutter and antisocial behaviour. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a range of users from 87-year-olds to 18-year-olds, with 82% of our riders being 18 to 32. From a gender perspective, the UK average across the sector is 25% female users. However, Voi is actually a 60% uplift on that, and we have 40% of our users being female, and that's through a lot of the work we do with women in transport, the institution and local initiatives and outreach programs. From a modal shift perspective, 21.5% of our riders in the UK say that they're now using e-scooters for journeys previously taken by car. The key driver for modal shifts are availability, convenience, and affordability. And where we will see this increase further is through improved infrastructure, such as segregated bike lanes to help create a safer rider experience. From a managing parking perspective, Voi is the first operator to manage a scaled service. That's a service in excess of 1,000 scooters, and getting parking right is very important at this level. Key learnings of getting parking right is cooperation with the councils and key stakeholders, including the visually impaired and for example, Pete at the guide dogs. The accountability of our riders, ensuring their actions are reviewed and either rewarded for good behaviour or penalised for poor behaviour, such as the strikes on accounts that we do and banning of our riders that we also do, and also investing in infrastructure. As Pete from Guide Dogs mentioned, scooters parked poorly can significantly impact the welfare of the visually impaired. So for micromobility to flourish and make a positive impact to everyone, we need to find a better way to park in cities. And this will involve taking scooters off the pavement and ideally onto the road. And based on 21.5% of our modal shift, we've taken 300,000 cars off the road. On this logic, we should be comfortable removing car parking spaces to accommodate this new form of transport. From a safety perspective, we've had 1.1 hospital admission per 1 million kilometers traveled. That is 46% less than by pedal bikes. So, but no accident is acceptable. And as part of our Vision Zero plan, we will continue to work hard to reducing that. And finally, on antisocial behaviour, a quick nod to Somerset and Avon Police. In the first 5 months of the trial, 388 incidents were reported to the police, only 6.5% related to e-scooter shared services, so 94% from private e-scooters. And the key reason for this is lack of accountability, lack of control, enforcement and incentives, and poor maintenance and vehicle safety compliance. Going forwards, we would hope to see alignment between legal requirements for both shared and private e-scooters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Richard. And finally, Phil Ellis from Beryl.
Oh, yeah.
You there, Phil?
Phil, you're on mute.
Oh, what a waste of 15 seconds. Yeah. Hi there. Yeah. So Beryl, a UK company, we're about 100 people, and we are involved in about 8 different micromobility systems throughout the country, 3 of which we've now introduced electric scooters into in Norwich, Bournemouth and Poole, and also on the Isle of Wight. Being last, I'll try and add some sort of different thoughts than that everybody else has. From our perspective, we offer the full range of micromobility vehicles, from bikes, e-bikes, e-scooters, and e-cargo bikes. And we think that's quite important for the ability of ourselves to offer different vehicles for different price points and for different types of journeys. I think everybody's talked about geofence parking control, so I won't go on to that, but we absolutely agree. We've always run our bike share services and our electric scooter services with enforceable parking controls, and it's just essential, and it then does allow you to create some interesting infrastructure like Richard spoke about earlier in terms of parklets and things that really encourage all forms of active mobility. But I guess, yeah, from our perspective, what we see is, running any shared micromobility service requires, obviously really excellent, diligent operations and logistics, and an unwavering focus on safety. But commercially now, introducing e-scooters, it can provide a real sort of commercial shot in the arm to a shared micromobility fleet, and increase the addressable market, increase the number of people who are using the services. And so we're really keen to sort of build the e-scooter into that micromobility asset class to elevate the user experience and elevate the commercial viability of shared schemes. And we think it's important to do that, because if we have policies that support shared transport, and if we have policies that support active travel, then creating shared micromobility systems that are commercially viable and are rolled out more broadly, we should use the scooter to help elevate all shared journeys across bikes and e-bikes and e-cargo bikes that contribute real benefits more broadly. In just a month, we see the schemes where we've launched scooters increasing membership by 30%, and about 75% of users within that scheme are then cross-pollinating onto all of the different modes. So yeah, we see them as a really useful shot in the arm to all micromobility fleets, really.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Phil. Right, okay. Thank you to all of those. There's a number of questions that have come up in the chat, and I think that those 4 providers, I think Richard Dilts will have to answer those at the final Q&A session, because we do need to move on now. And we've got Richard Mckiernan, who's from the traffic management unit of Avon and Somerset Police. Over to you, Richard.
Good morning. Well, they always say don't start a presentation with an apology, but I'm afraid I'm going to. This won't be death by PowerPoint, but I'm afraid there are a couple of slides. So here we go. Let me get this to work. I rather inherited the lead for e-scooters by making the mistake of being the only person in the office when my head of department dropped in. And to be honest, this was probably my initial reaction on hearing the plans for the trials. From a police perspective, our main concerns, obviously from a road safety and enforcement angle. Now, I was convinced that we would have a huge surge in the number of collisions on the road. So have my fears been justified? On a monthly basis, I monitor all the calls made to us and work out anything involving an e-scooter. On average, we probably take about 100 calls a month across the force area, but the majority of those are within the Bristol area. This is a breakdown of the calls we've received since the trials went live in October last year, split into incident type. As you can see, they cover a wide range of incidents, and you might be thinking there's a lot, but one of the caveats is that in a vast majority of these, the e-scooter is incidental to rather than the focus of the incident. Often they're just simply the mode of transport. So in incidents such as assaults, thefts, and reports of missing people, it's where the offender or an involved party is made off on an e-scooter, whereas poor or pavement riding are more what you might consider to be true e-scooter incidents. I've also broken down the data into those where the scooter was one of the trial ones or was privately owned. In reality, you can see the trial scooters are involved in very few incidents, especially when you put them into the following context. Since Voi went live in Bristol, their scooters covered over 1 million kilometres, and last week alone there were over 50,000 rides. So single figure incident rates are actually very reassuring from a police perspective. The biggest relief, I guess, is the low number of road traffic collisions. They were my initial concern, or my biggest concern initially, and of the 3 reported to us, we've only got 3 which are injuries, and all of minor nature. However, cold data is just that, and I think it's fair to say that the trials do not come out without some issues or concerns from the local communities where the trials are running. The following are probably the main concerns raised with the local policing teams. All our rental operators have a public-facing system to allow issues to be raised with them, and many have ambassadors who are visible on the street, so the vast majority of minor offences can be reported to them and dealt with internally, which I think is quite appropriate. Parking issues are slightly different in that, whilst not strictly a police issue, is one of the issues which is raised frequently with us. With geofenced virtual parking bays on the pavement, there has been an increase in complaints about the risk posed to the visually impaired, the disabled, pushchair users, etc., especially in the more residential areas. I mean, I do sit on the equality stakeholder group. This is probably the most debated topic, but I think it's quite important to remember that this is a trial, and the whole purpose of the trial is to identify issues which come up and then look for sort of solutions rather than to, as we've had on a couple of occasions, calls to actually stop the trials altogether. Another slightly unforeseen problem for the police has been internal. Being a relatively new phenomenon, e-scooters not recognised by any of our systems, so monitoring incidents has been trickier than I would have liked. And also the officers were actually unfamiliar with the legislation relating to them, so we've had to develop our own sort of systems and procedures and guidance about how to deal with e-scooter incidents. So what is the Avon Somerset approach to enforcement? Well, with the trials, users need to register and provide a driving licence. The scooters themselves have unique registration numbers and all have GPS fitted to them, so riders can be identified retrospectively should the need arise. I've always maintained that for the more minor transgressions, it is very much for the operators to self-police rather than to rely on us to do it for them. Obviously, we can and do deal with the more serious offences, but these have been minimal. Operators have an internal 3 strikes process for dealing with misuse, and I think that's much more proportionate than taking somebody through the criminal justice system. Whilst I know that this is more focused on the trials, it isn't really possible not to make mention of those scooters which are privately owned. Going back to that table of incidents, it clearly demonstrates they cause far greater problems than the trial ones. And I've separated those out because I think it's essential that not all the ills of e-scooters misuse are blamed on the trials, which to a certain extent, and that really media related, I think does tend to happen. As well as all the issues common to the trial scooters, privately owned ones come with the additional offence of being illegal to use in public, although you wouldn't know that looking at the roads. Nor are they identifiable, so tracing a rider retrospectively is almost impossible unless they're found committing. There's no regulation, so being illegal, there's no age restrictions, there's no license, and the majority of users seem totally unaware that their use is illegal. Certainly most retail websites infer that their use is the environmentally friendly way of commuting to work and getting around your town or city. And when we stop people, many say they were not advised that they were, when they bought them, they weren't illegal, or they can be taken to court for no insurance and other associated offences. And this is something we're trying to tackle with in Bristol with the local authorities and trading standards. With privately owned scooters, because of this lack of knowledge, and people are often using with all the best intentions of being green, reducing congestion and pollution, coupled with a lack of awareness, unless there is some serious misuse, our force is taking the approach very much a la COVID and the 4 E's of engage, explain, educate, and then enforce. So on the first stop, the lawyers point out to them, they're allowed to take their e-scooter home, but the fact they have been warned is recorded, and should they be stopped again, the scooter is seized and destroyed, and they're obviously then reported for new insurance and any associated age offences, which we think is probably proportionate in the circumstances. So 6 months in, and although the e-scooter trials as a topic which has certainly captured the interest of the media, from the policing perspective in Neighbour and Somerset, they have caused us very few concerns in the context of everything else that we have to deal with. That's not to say there haven't been issues, and I fully accept not everybody is 100% in favour of e-scooters, but it hasn't produced the demand on the police that I expected. I mean, having said that, I do have some real concerns about what happens when the trials are over in October and what decisions are taken about the future of e-scooters in general. Simply making all e-scooters legal without any regulation will cause a real problem from policing perspectives. As ever, it's not the use of e-scooters which causes problems, it's the misuse. In relation to the trials, have I changed my opinion about the trials? Yes. And do I support them? Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Richard. There's been a couple of questions, and the difficulty for this whole topic is we're almost talking about two different issues, the e-scooter trials and private ownership of e-scooters, which is the only kind of e-scooters we see around here. And as Richard's data showed, seems to be where the bulk of the negative issues are happening, and the dangerous issues as well. So Steve Wilson's asked, have you seen e-scooter use being adopted as a means of travel for gangs, which we seem to be experiencing in London?
Yeah, we've really got three main broad categories. I think we've got people who are using them, I say properly, in the sense of commuting to and from work. They're stopping at traffic lights, they're wearing helmets and all the usual bits and pieces. And the only problem is that the fact they're illegal. The other are the mum and dad out walking with 10-year-old son along Western Seafront on an e-scooter on a Sunday afternoon and not causing any problems. And the third group are, yes, so some of our organised crime groups are using them for getting around the city and delivering drugs. And that's obviously the ones that we are targeting. So, I mean, we have that flexibility in approach. We will make our enforcement proportionate to the offence that's actually been committed.
Yeah, I mean, my chief police officer said that they would do as you said you do, warning first. But then I had two youngsters who, college students, no previous record, were fined, had their e-scooters impounded and had 6 points taken off their licenses, and one of them whom didn't even have a license, and it was completely disproportionate, and it felt like they were victims of stop and search, but with the added complication of being on e-scooters. So some inconsistency there. Do you feel, Richard, that there's a need for police forces nationally and the government nationally, along with local authorities, to do far more around the public information that private e-scooters are not actually legal in this country? Because that's certainly young people don't know that they're not legal.
Undoubtedly. Certainly when you buy them, like I say, we're working with trading standards at the moment. If you look at the websites, they are selling them on the green credentials of commuting and, and all the right things, apart from the fact they're not legal. And then it's buried deep on page 27 of the T's and C's in font 4 that you can't actually use them. But yeah, the inferences, and I think the vast majority of people we stop on them are totally surprised when we tell them their use is not legal.
I think that's all, unless anybody can correct me. I think those are the main questions that would come for Richard, and we are a bit behind time. So Adam, unless you can see an issue about that, I will go now on. And thank you, Richard, for your contribution, and very interesting to say how you changed your perspective on the scooter trials based on the experience you've had. So thank you very much for that. And our last speaker is Dominique Dunbrook, who's the Senior Economic Development Officer from North Devon Council, which is the council that my colleague Selene Saxby is one of the MPs for. So Dominique, over to you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's great to come and contribute this morning. We are very new in our trials, so we did literally launch about 3 weeks ago. We have an interesting sort of tri-partnership between VOI, who we've heard from already this morning, North Devon Council, and our further and higher education college Petroc. We're a very rural district, and I think we're probably one of the most rural districts within the DFT trial. So that's quite interesting to compare how logistically this runs in terms of comparing with a city or a much larger settlement area. Our trial decision came about due to the increasing issues we have around our college site. A lot of car journeys made by parents dropping off their children to the college in the morning and in the sort of pickup times. Residents in the area around the college obviously finding that quite impactful for them, with a huge number of cars parking up on the side of the roads, onto the pavements to drop the children off. So the college are very sort of forward thinking. They have sort of a carbon neutral plan to sort of enact, as we do as a local authority. And this trial solution came along at the right time for us to kind of see whether e-scooters could be the solution to our first and last mile issue. So we are looking more in our sort of area at this as a long-term rental scheme with VOI. Students can sign up and register for a scooter, and then they will have that for the duration of the trial. So it'll be theirs to keep for the trial period, for them to be able to sort of get up and down from the college campus to perhaps the bus station or train station where they may come into Barnstable. It may be that they use it to get to the college from their home in one of the surrounding sort of housing estates. So we are hoping to see through the trial period a reduction in traffic congestion and pollution caused around that sort of Petroc site, the college site, and hopefully the impact on the neighbouring residents will be beneficial as well. We are working with students, so the younger age group for this trial. VOI, I have every confidence in the safety sort of precautions they've put in, the training that they will be providing for students, and obviously we have a great basis for that education because our cohort of users are within an educational setting, being part of the college setup. So the college are on board with ensuring those safety messages in particular are strongly reinforced with all the students that register to take on a long-term rental scooter. I think one of the interesting aspects, and this may be a consideration for if we roll, sort of if DFT decide to kind of bring in scooter usage as a permanent fixture, particularly in our area, looking at the infrastructure that is in place to enable scooters to sort of ride safely on a highway along with normal motorised traffic. Interestingly, we have very few cycle lanes in and around our main town of Barnstable attached to a highway. We have some shared pavement surfaces where you have a sort of a white line and you cycle that side and you walk that side. But in terms of the infrastructure, I think we would need to sort of look at how that is embedded more in transport policy, transport sort of capital programs to ensure that perhaps e-scooters and other forms of sort of motorized bikes can be used on highways without sort of that potential of mixing with the cars too much. So I think that's one thing that we've already considered after looking at our area and geofencing and looking at where scooters can safely be used. We interestingly did have a discussion with our neighbouring authority, Torridge. They decided not to be part of the trial. We were hoping to include them. The key issue amongst their elected members was safety in the high streets and having scooters sort of up and down the high street, leaning up against windows, left in the pavements where older residents may find them a hazard. Those with impairments, mobility scooters, could cause conflicts. So we're hoping that through our trial, we're looking at having some designated parking areas just outside of our pedestrianised high street to ensure that we can try and remove that conflict and ensure that the scooters are stored safely when the riders aren't using them, so that other walkers and users of the high street don't come into conflict with them. We are quietly launching just due to the period we're in at the moment. So we are hoping to do a very large sort of promotion of the e-scooter trial sort of after the middle of May. But we have already gone live and we've already received nearly 20 registrations during half term and without much promotion. So I think we will see a much larger take up of the offer when the students get back onto campus full time, and we can promote this heavily. But I think we're quite excited to see how the trial data sort of pans out, and we are seriously considering that this could be a really useful way of reducing that congestion within our sort of main settlements. So I think I can leave it there. That was just to sort of give a flavour. We're quite pleased to be involved. Seeing Richard there and the sort of overview he's just given, we work very closely with our Devon and Cornwall police. They're fully on board. They will be doing some training sessions alongside VOI representatives and the college sort of representatives to the students when we can sort of more safely go back on site and do face-to-face contacts. And we're looking forward to getting Selene onto a scooter very soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominique. That was really useful, both from being a rural trial and also around a specific setting, in this case, a college. I have one question based on my experience and others in London around commuters. How do you deal with the issue of the e-scooters going into the college in the morning and then out? They're not available, you know, and the availability for people who then go in a bit later and there's none available. And is there a logistics exercise in moving the scooters around to address that issue?
Yeah, so the long-term rental scheme will work whereby a scooter is allocated to a student for the full trial, so they can take it home, they can use it outside of college time. So if they want to go and visit their friends at the weekend, they can sort of get on their scooter and go rather than asking mum or dad to take them. So they will have that scooter sort of for the whole of the trial period, unless they wish to hand it back for whatever reason. So there are some logistics. We have introduced, and again, that sort of safety angle that VOI are keen to sort of promote. None of the scooters are allowed to be used on roads over 40 miles an hour in our trial period. So we have sort of got some logistical issues around where that then cuts off transport links. In particular, our coastal area is linked by a dual carriageway over 40 miles an hour. So we will be seeing how those certain restrictions then impact on the take up of the scooters during the trial. But yes, a rural setting does present more challenges. As you can appreciate, we have a lot of roads, very small, narrow, leading sort of out from our main settlement into sort of rural hinterlands. So the logistics of using a scooter and the safety has to be paramount to a successful trial. So we have put in some restrictions that may, as I say, impact the take up, but a trial is just that. It's to look at how different things affect it. So
thank you very much, and thank you to all our speakers. I'm going to hand over for the final session to my co-chair Selene Saxby MP and she'll chair the final part with any unanswered questions. So thank you very much, and over to you, Selene.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you to all of today's panelists. And I've just asked, we've got more questions than we're going to manage to get through. So any panelist who's good at multitasking, if you're able to click on the Q&A button and answer some questions, that would be marvellous, because I know there's lots of questions in there and we're not going to get through them all. So I have selected out a few juicy ones, and please feel free to wave violently at me if you would like to answer it. If not, I'll on somebody that seems the most appropriate. So I've got a question here from David Davis, the Chief Executive from PACT, and he asks, if the objective is to get people out of cars, not abstract walk and cycle trips, would speakers agree that limiting scooters to people with a driving licence makes sense, and that those with no licence could rent an e-bike? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Would it be okay for me to take that one? Because I think I just responded to David in a text anyway on the chat. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think the only thing to consider is whether or not in the long term we want to be encouraging people who otherwise have no interest in driving a car or don't want to drive a car, particularly I'm thinking about younger people, from going through the process of getting a driving license. There's definitely an argument, and I don't have data from the UK about this, but there's definitely an argument that suggests that once people have got a driving license, they're more likely to use it to drive a car, which is an outcome clearly in cities that we don't want. I think second of all, there is a question here about, I also put this in the chat to David, about equitable access. We know that certain groups within society are far more likely to have formal means of identification than other groups, far more likely to possess a driving license, and there's a question there about whether or not we want to try, whether or not it's acceptable to exclude groups that perhaps don't have a driving license or provisional driving license from using the scooters as a result of this type of that type of approach. So I think it's an interesting question, but I think those are the kind of things that I would be thinking about, and the concerns that if I was the government, I'd want to be making certain were addressed.
Thank you, Alan. And if nobody else wants to come in, welcome to the other parliamentarians who are on the call. That, as it's a webinar, we can't see you, but thank you for tuning in and asking questions. So I have a question here from Lillian Greenwood, who asks, what successful strategies have you implemented that prevent pavement use? And how are you ensuring that e-scooters are parked considerately and safely? Any of the operators like to come in on that? Oh,
hello. I'm happy to jump in if the other guys are feeling a bit shy. So on the pavement riding, there's a number of initiatives that we take, both from technology, but also from in a human perspective. From a technology perspective, we've got the first visual AI technology that's being installed in Northampton from this month that will identify if someone is actually riding on the pavement or not. And if that trial goes well, then that will be rolled out across the entire fleet. These are early days, so I think we're all trying to find, and I know that there is another operator who also is looking at similar technology, and I think it's important for us to really kind of solve this problem. And technology is one way to do it. From another perspective, there are things that sometimes technology cannot solve, and so we have invested over £2.5 million over the last 6 months on our ambassador program, and these are large teams of Voi employees working on the streets who are able to monitor how people are riding, and if they're riding on the pavement, if they're twin riding two people on the scooter, if they're parking poorly, or whatever they're doing, if they're dangerously riding, we issue a strike or a ban on that rider. And we've issued 5,500 strikes since we've launched, and 450 of our riders, 450 out of our 220,000 riders have been permanently banned from the system. Again, this is super important to ensure that this is a safe service, not just for the riders and other road users, but also pedestrians as well.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
so we endorse all of those principles, and Boyd doing good work there. Just to add to that, something that can be done, or that will take time and investment, and picking up on something Pete recommended earlier, which is around adding an audible alert to the vehicles. So TIER is pioneering a project around that, and we're hoping to sort of come to market before too long with sort of recommended standards, which we're agreeing in consultation with sight loss charities, and then the solution itself. And that will alert vulnerable pedestrians of the approach of e-scooters should they be on pavements. But if you do all of the things that Richard and other operators enact, then hopefully we'll see a reduction in that misbehavior anyway.
Thank you. And on a very different tact, partly because I don't actually want my further education college to go up in smoke, Mark Golder has asked, in the context of the return to the office, e-scooter battery charging seems to be a safety concern in terms of the heat generated. And Bosch go as far as saying, do not charge batteries when unattended and place on a fireproof material. So there may be a temptation to charge e-scooter batteries at the desk. Does the industry have any further guidance or clarity around this point, please? Is anyone aware of this as an issue? Anyone had their desk go up in smoke from an e-scooter battery charging event?
I guess just from a technical perspective, lithium-ion batteries are incredibly flammable, and therefore in general needs to be charged in an environment that is temperature controlled. So all of our scooters use swappable batteries. We take the batteries out from the fleet. We put them into our e-bikes, our e-cargo bikes, and take them to our warehouses that are temperature controlled, and they're charged in a safe environment. Those that are using it on long-term rentals, or indeed those who are illegally using it through private rentals, require education and making sure that when they're charging in a home environment, that they too are following those instructions as well. So it's super important that education and investment in that is done correctly. If charged correctly, for the most part, it's incredibly safe. There's lithium ion in your phones and in other electronic equipment in your house. It's not the only thing that has lithium ion, but because these are large batteries, they have the potential for them to combust. And the impact that can have is just as high as phones, but we need to make sure that there's the appropriate education in place for safe charging practice.
Thank you, that's reassuring. So Dominic, I'm hoping you'll have those students under control down the road. So a question from Tom Jones: does compulsory helmet wearing improve driver behaviour? Does anyone have any views or knowledge on this one? Or Colette, there we go. Thank you.
So we operate in Australia where there is compulsory helmet riding, and so we have to lock in a helmet to the scooter so everyone has the opportunity to use it. The usage rates of helmets are very, very high. They have to be because it's illegal not to. And since we've locked it into the scooter, it's gone up even higher.
Fantastic.
Sorry, if I can add, it's a really interesting question, because actually there's also been data has shown that when a car driver is driving alongside someone wearing a helmet, they actually drive a bit more loosely. They feel a bit overconfident, and arguably there is greater danger to the individual on two wheels. That is not to say, however, we don't recommend helmet wearing. We think it's one of the most sensible things you can do before getting on two wheels, but it is a very complicated question. The balance we strike is to provide a helmet on every trip. So in a COVID safe way, in a helmet box attached to the scooter that is unlocked via the app, so that people have access to that safe solution, but in an environment in the UK where it's not mandatory.
Fantastic, thank you. And whilst we do have Richard Mckiernan with us, I think I'd like to ask, there's been a comment from Lord Russell of Liverpool in the Q&A suggesting that the police are not perhaps as interested in this area as they could be. And having just come back from Westminster myself, I have to say I have nearly been taken out by e-scooters on the South Bank virtually every afternoon. I did once see a policeman actually, which was reassuring, but it does seem to be an area that is quite hard to police. And people do know that cycling and e-scooter usage on the pavement is not really policed in London, to be honest, in the main. So I just wondered, from a policing perspective, do you expect that to change moving forward, or are there plans afoot to actually address the problem?
I mean, certainly it is a concern. I think that part of the problem is that everything we do is based on prioritised on threat, harm and risk. And I know that the potential for somebody riding an e-scooter poorly is fairly high. But I mean, I had a look on our system before I came on the meeting today, and there are at the moment 308 outstanding calls that we have to go to, and no cops available at this time. Some of those are sort of our priority calls involving domestic assaults, burglaries, sort of road traffic collisions. So you know, the police will always prioritise those above somebody riding an e-scooter on a pavement. It's not to say that we don't tackle it, but it's a case of, you know, it will be prioritised amongst everything else we're doing. So what we do generally find is that the local policing teams will develop patrol plans to tackle particular areas where this is particularly rife. I know the Bristol City Centre are looking at the issue in and around the main shopping areas, and up in South Gloucester we've got again student houses. And again, there is sort of more antisocial behaviour geared with that. But I mean, it will be policed in line with all our other priorities that we have to deal with, I'm afraid.
Do you think there's an opportunity? So this is something we're looking at. So I live in a seaside location up in North Devon, and this is a conversation I had with my Police and Crime Commissioner's office last Friday over a different issue about sort of the shared resourcing of policing. So here we have a number of different traffic wardens to come and look at different car parks, very complicated multi-layer council. But could traffic wardens also not be a part of this solution and actually policing it? I mean, is there an opportunity to sort of extend that, because they're obviously walking up and down the pavement here, and could easily be deterring e-scooter riders at the same time? Do you think there's an opportunity to think slightly more laterally about how we enforce this moving forward?
I mean, and this is the joy of the trials over the privately owned ones, is that they are identifiable. So even if, you know, somebody whizzes past you and you can report it, that can be dealt with retrospectively. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be found committing. So, you know, the fact that you see a police car driving past doesn't mean that. But yes, having a wider sort of a policing family, if you like. I mean, our PCSOs are obviously out and about on foot all the time. We don't have traffic wardens in our area any longer. But yes, I mean, having that ability, but it's the privately owned ones where we're struggling really to police those. That they're the ones where we get the vast majority of our calls in relation to, rather than the trial ones. The trial ones we can deal with.
Thank you. And so Fabian Hamilton asked, so this is an interesting question for us, because obviously we are the APPG for cycling and walking, and e-scooters are not really either cycling or walking. But whilst increasing use of e-scooters may reduce fossil fuel emissions, shouldn't we be doing more to encourage active travel like cycling and walking, so people are actually physically able to do so, and that e-scooters will do nothing to improve public health other than reduce carbon emissions? I know it was mentioned this morning about the app and pricing it so that the cycling was always cheaper. Do you think there is other things that we could do, or just by people being outside more, do you think they then actually just become more active in their travel? Any thoughts on this? Anyone like to take that?
Happy to jump in here. What we found through our studies is that actually by introducing e-scooters into cities, people become more open to other forms of transport. So you'll actually see cycling usage and walking increase as e-scooters are launched in cities. And e-scooters have really captured the imagination of the public, a very frictionless modal shift from cars to micromobility in a way that has been very difficult to do with just launching bikes first. So through launching e-scooters first, you do create this open-mindedness to other forms of non-car travel. So there is a benefit there. Also, I think if we look at some of the stats, I think Richard Dilks mentioned it and some of the other people as well, that we are seeing average journeys from 2 to 4 miles. If we look at UK averages, the average user and the average pedestrian in the UK will walk up to 1 kilometre before they start to think about other forms of mobility. So as long as we keep a focus on those journeys that are considerably higher than that 1 kilometre, that's the role we need to play. And if we're starting to see that average distance reduced, then yes, we are going to be taking a lot of people from walking. But I think in this day and age, people are so time-starved that we just don't have that luxury anymore to walk 4 miles. We're packing so much into our days. We want everything now, we're getting deliveries now. taxis hailed now. Everything's happening now. So it's very hard to get someone walking 4 miles. But what we can do is encourage them to start to think about other forms of transport with e-scooters. And obviously pricing is an important thing here to make sure that we're not making it so cheap that people are thinking, well, why do I need to use these legs anymore? So there is a role to play also from a pricing perspective and a commercial model in how we incentivize people and how they travel.
If I could come in here as well, Selene,
yeah, of course.
Just briefly, I think we should be clear-sighted on how active e-kick scooters are. If you look at the calories burned studies, they're significantly more active than driving a car. They're significantly less active than cycling, and walking. So we should just understand that and be accurate about it. There are then interesting options about how you start targeting those particular journeys, journey lengths, destinations, and so on through the apps, through aggregate journey planners in the future, and so on. There's a lot that can be done that way. The compound effect point here, I think, is really important. We don't yet know exactly how this is panning out between the modes. The more we can learn about that in public domain as these trials go on, the better, I think. But just drawing on our bike share and our car share research, which we've been doing for 5 years and 15 years respectively, we find these compound effects are very powerful. So that as people use shared options, they use public transport more, they use active travel modes more, they drive less. And that holds across both those modes with different, different percentages in each. I suspect we would find something similar at work here in the ecosystem. By adding in more options, we're going to get more people doing more of the things we want, not the other way around. But it remains to be tested, found out in public domain. Hope that happens.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And I'm going to take one final question, as Hugh Merriman from the Transport Select Committee has joined us as well. And he's asked about geofencing as a means to keep scooters off pavements. Is this something for the future, which, as it would mean, police and authorities are the only controller in town at the moment? Does anyone have any info on geofencing briefly? Oh, Hugh, we seem to have drawn a blank on that one for you. Sorry. So you can retreat to hiding as Martha again now, as we've been unable to answer that question for you this morning. But if anyone does hear about that, I think Ruth's on the Transport Select Committee as well, so I'm sure they'll be interested to hear. But I believe I've got a slide coming up. So thank you everyone for coming. So in the interest of finishing on time, as I know everyone would like to have back-to-back Zoom, or parliamentarians are probably off campaigning for the afternoon. Next week, we have a very special event on the 29th at 7:30 p.m. with Jeremy Vine from BBC Radio 2, who will be interviewing Isabel Hardman, the spectator and presenter of BBC Radio 4's Week in Westminster, alongside Peter Walker, political correspondent from The Guardian, about their recent book releases. And so we've been talking this morning about active travel, and they both are exploring the transformative effects that physical activity and active travel can have on physical and mental health, which certainly I know a number of us are really interested in as we come out of the pandemic, and actually making sure that we are all more active, as we know that will actually help our health longer term. So Isabel's book is The Natural Health Service, How Nature Can Mend Your Mind, and Peter Walker's book, The Miracle Pill, both great reads if you haven't read them yet. If not, we'd love to see you next Thursday afternoon, and do get in touch with Adam from the APPG, and he will be able to arrange that for you. So thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our panelists this morning. It's been a really interesting session, and thank you to everyone that's come. It's been quite busy on here this morning with the webinar, which I think reflects the level of interest and concern, quite rightly, because I know that I've had a lot of correspondence on this ahead of the launch up here, but by the same token reassured by the policing view on it and actually what's gone on in the trials that have gone ahead. So let's all stay in touch on this subject. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the Secretariat and to Adam for sorting all this out, and have a lovely weekend, everybody, in the sunshine. Do take care.
Thank you.